All right. Can you hear me okay? I'm going to use my phone for notes if I need them, so don't think I'm texting, just in case. Well, Craig alluded to it earlier. I was a youth pastor for 6 years, and then we started a church in Iowa City. I called it a church plant last time, and people didn't know what that means because it's just a term, I guess. It means a new church. So we were part of this church plant, and so for about 10 years, every week I've had a sermon to deliver, and sometimes more than one sermon. Sometimes I would preach on Wednesday to the kids and then to the rest of the congregation on Sundays, and so I got pretty good at that. But about a year ago I realized 90% of what I was saying was not being heard, or definitely not retained. And so I stopped giving sermons, and I said, instead, let's have conversations. Because I wanted to connect with the people that I was with in our church. And it was hard. It was excruciating, I would say. Because I refused to lead the conversation because it quickly would turn into a lecture. And so I would just ask a question and let people answer. And there was a lot of silence. And so in that amount of time, in all those years, and the years we've been doing the church plant, I have a lesson for you today that I've learned from the failure of that church, and I would like to share it with you if you're interested in hearing it. Because I have a plan B, and it's just a conversation where you guys have it, and it's not going to be very much fun. Okay, well, before I get into it, I want to share a couple stories, two that seem kind of unconnected, but I will bring them together, I promise. So just bear with me for a moment. But one of them is from a TED Talk by a guy named Johann Hari. And this guy, if you've never heard of a TED Talk before, you can look up on YouTube his talk. It's called Everything You Think You Know About Addiction is Wrong. And so for me, my story I'm going to share with you is about heroin, which is a pretty exciting way to start out my sermon. I'm pretty excited about it. I'm sure you are as well. And that's how he kind of starts out his talk. Now, he goes much more in depth with it, but I love when scientific evidence points us to truths that we already know is true because of God and because of the message of the Bible and what we read. Sometimes we think this is right, but I don't know why, psychologically or whatever. And this is one of those instances where when you hear him speak, you go, that makes sense to us. We get that. So here's what he did. And the story about heroin that I'm joking about, but if we were to take a couple pews of you, and we were to say, here, we want you to take this heroin 3 times a day for 20 days, what would happen to those people in those pews? Anyone? They'd get, what? Well, they'd run out, yeah. They'd be gone. I hope so. I hope you're right. Maybe, under different situations, maybe. But we know they would get addicted. Their life, what would happen to their life? Their life would start to crumble, and they'd lose things and people in their lives. And that's the story we've been told. And the reason we've been told that story is, for some of us, we've experienced that. There are family members, people we know that have had those kinds of crises. But also there was an experiment done in the 50s with rats. So here's what they would do. They would put a rat in a cage, and they would give it 2 choices, water and water laced with heroin. And almost 100% of the time, the rat would choose the heroin water and overdose until it died. Almost 100% of the time, it would die from overdosing on heroin. And so that's the story we've been told, that this is what happens when we do this. Except that if you were to go out right now and get hit by a bus and you broke your hip and you'd have to have a hip replacement, they would prescribe you something called diamorphine. And diamorphine is actually really good heroin. So any of you who have had a major surgery have probably been prescribed something like this. And the stuff on the street that people are using and buying illegally is actually so contaminated, very little of it is actual heroin. But diamorphine, however, is really good heroin. And you take it like clockwork, right? How many times a day for how many days until your thing runs out? And how many prescriptions do you get refills and all that stuff? And yet, you're not addicted. Actually, in the last service, when I told that story, people were looking at each other like, I'm on diamorphine. Or I take that when I had the surgery. Oh my gosh, it was heroin, And so there's that, well, what's going to happen in my life? Well, you're fine. Because that story isn't the whole story. So many years after that rat experiment was done, another scientist came along and said, that experiment wasn't very smart. We need to try it again, but this time we're going to do it differently. We're going to take these rats and we're going to put them in a place that he called Rat Park. It had every activity a rat would ever want. It had many, many rats, not just one, but several. There's bunches of them. They were allowed all the food they'd ever want, they could make all the babies they ever wanted. All the stuff that they wanted was there. And they had water and the heroin-laced water to choose from. Now, what do you think happened? In the first experiment, almost 100% of them overdosed until death. In the second experiment, 0% of them overdosed until death. Now, this was just one example he gave of evidence of what we know about addiction being wrong. But here's the conclusion he made that I'm going to share with you, that I want to use. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. I'm going to say that again. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Now, we are humans and we bond. That's what we do. And so if we have a bad life and things aren't going well and the people in our life aren't that great, we find something else to bond with, don't we? It may be drugs, it may be alcohol, it may be many other things, and the choices are endless. So you can see how connection, being so important to who we are and so important to our life, you can see why I want to talk about it. But before I go into how that connects to our story with God, I want to talk about one other story, this other book I read, and it was by Chris Anderson. And Chris Anderson wrote a book called Free. And he was talking about how, in this world where we have free apps, have you ever downloaded a free app? Some of you may have smartphones that you think, I've used this free app. How does this company make money? And this just doesn't make sense. That kind of conversation. Well, actually, this isn't a new thing. Apps are not the first thing to ever give things away for free, hoping to make money in the long run. Another one that happened many years ago is Jell-O. How many of you have heard of Jell-O? Good. Last service, 2 people raised their hand. I was like, come on. You know what Jell-O is. Jell-O is actually pretty gross. It's made of, I think it's bone. It's mostly a bone is where the gelatin comes from. And so the guy who invented it was going around trying to sell it to grocers. None of them wanted it. And what he suggested you do with it is make meat gelatin. I've never had it. I don't ever want to have it. It was a horrible idea, and you can imagine why no one wanted to buy it. And so he thought, well, this is a flop. He ended up selling it to a friend of his for $200, something like that. And this friend had an idea. I'm going to go, and instead of trying to sell the Jell-O to the grocers, I'm going to give away a free recipe book door to door with all Jell-O recipes. So he went door to door and he gave away this recipe book and said, here you go, and here's my card, and go to your grocery store if you're looking for Jell-O. And then he went to the grocery store and said, here's my card. If anyone comes around asking for Jell-O, just give me a call. And of course they said, no one's going to ask for Jell-O. I won't need your card. But people started coming in. Hey, where can I get Jell-O? I need Jell-O. We don't have any? I can go to the grocery store. No, I'll get you some. So that is how Jell-O turned in from this gross, horrible thing to what we all now know. You all raise your hand. I know what Jell-O is. And we all know it's this great thing. And they started by giving it away for free. And I look at that and I think, that's genius. And then I turn the page of the book, and the next page is about a different guy. This guy is an inventor in a big company. They make household items. And he invented something one day, and he brought it to his boss. And his boss said, that's a great idea. But if you want to make us all rich, you need to invent something that we can give away for free once, and then they buy it from us for the rest of their lives. And that, a few weeks later, is how the disposable razor was invented. So I look at the Jell-O and I think, genius. And I look at the razor and I think, you jerks. You got me. And I'm stuck, and we all are, aren't we? We have to buy these stinking disposable razors, and it's just such a good idea, but I'm mad. And so this is the kind of stuff I lie in bed awake thinking about. While you guys are sleeping sound, I'm thinking, how can I get out of this? They've tricked me. How can I get out of it? I want to outfox Big Razor. And so it sent me to the internet. I've been on this kick for the last couple of years of learning. I've just been learning science. I'm mad at myself because I feel like I ignored all my science classes through school, and now I'm relearning the stuff I should have learned then, and I'm like, glass is so cool, so it's such a funny thing. And I just the other day I was telling the silliest story, and I felt like everyone was just looking at me like, what is wrong with you? Because I was like, look at this tree. Okay, but hold on. So anyway, I found out there are 2 main reasons that razor blades get dull and we have to buy a new one. Now, they are made of stainless steel, and that's what I would lie in bed thinking about. How is stainless steel dulled by hitting hairs. That doesn't make any sense. I know it just doesn't make sense. Well, there's only two real reasons that they get dull and we need to buy new ones. One of them is much more the reason than the second. But the smaller reason is that our hairs do cause damage to the razor blade. But there's a reason why. The reason is because stainless steel, and it is stainless steel, has been made so thin that it's able to cut through solid, that it's also vulnerable. That's important. Because if you took a big chunk of stainless steel and rubbed it against hair for a long time, you would never see anything come out of it. But if you make it thin enough and you run into enough hair, you will dull that blade. But it takes a long time. The second reason, the number one reason your blades go dull, is not even a physical change at all. It's a chemical change. It's what happens when water is left on stainless steel. Because even though they're less corrosive than other metals, it corrodes and it starts to turn into rust. And just a little bit of rust beginning to form makes your face really painful to shave, gentlemen. I'm sure you know. It's painful to shave with that dull blade, but you can stop that from happening. All you have to do is change your behavior. So, here's what you do. If you take your razor blade, and you can use water to shave, that's okay, that's a good thing. But then when you're done, if you use your towel and you dab off the water, that thing will last you a couple extra weeks. If you take a hair dryer when you're done and blow dry it until it's dry, that thing will last you months more. If you take that hair dryer, you blow it down, and then you dip it in rubbing alcohol, which will help dissolve all the rest of the water molecules on it, along with killing the bacteria, which is a bonus points for doing that. And then you put it into a place that does not have a lot of moisture around, that thing will last you over a year. One disposable razor will last you over a year of daily use if you treat it like that. Did you know that? You're welcome. Thank you for coming this morning. I really hope you appreciated my talk. No, but it's amazing. And some of you, hopefully today, will leave this place changed because you will no longer keep your razor blade in your shower because that's a horrible place to keep it. It will dull immediately. But how do those connect? How does it connect with us as Christians? So this is the important thing. No surprise, probably. I'm talking about Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17. And you can look it up in your Bible, but here it is. It's just as iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another. Now, I've heard that verse hundreds of times. Every men's retreat or small group I've ever been a part of or conference I go to, they use that verse. And I've always kind of gotten it because you think, what does sharpen mean in that scenario? It means sharpening our minds, sharpening our strength. What does that mean? We don't really know. Well, if I look at it from this angle, and if I use the words interchangeably, sharp and effective, because if a blade is going to be effective at cutting my hairs, it needs to be sharp, right? So if I'm using those words interchangeably and then dull with ineffective, now I have a different story. So if I'm looking at me as a Christian man, and I want to be more effective in ministry, there's something very interesting about sharp things being so thin and so vulnerable. Because what I really think that verse is about, although it may be about sharpening your mind and whatever that means, I think it's actually about intimacy. Just as one man sharpens another, just as one man teaches another how to be close, how to connect, that's what we do. We need to connect with each other. We need to teach each other how to be close. I'm not naturally a very intimate person. It's not in my DNA. I just don't want people to know what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling. Most men are probably like me, that we say, ugh, I don't like this. Small groups are not my favorite thing. I told you a year ago, we moved our church from being a worship service-centered church, which I think is a pretty normal thing, to being a small group-centered church. It was terrifying for me. I'm horrible at it. If you wanted me to lead something like this, I can do that. That's easy. I'm good at it. You want me to lead a bunch of people to be connected with each other? Ugh. So if I were to tell you why that church is failing and has failed on every measurable statistic you can find, that's the reason. Because I'm not good at connection. We aren't good at connection. So if I were to ask you a question, if I were to ask you, how many of you, if you were in a crisis right now, if something horrible happened in your life, with your family, whatever, you're going to call someone that is in this room right now. Now, you don't have to answer, but I just read your body language. And there's not probably a lot of you. So here's another interesting fact that Johann pointed out in his talk. Since 1950, the number of people that you call in that crisis scenario, that really close friend that you say, I really need to talk, something horrible just happened, can you come over? The number of people in our lives that we can count on like that since 1950 has been steadily declining in this direction. It's going way down. At the exact same time, since 1950, on an opposite trajectory, the number of square feet in our homes has been going up. What does that tell you about our values? Less connection with people. Why? Because they hurt us. Because I'm vulnerable when I have connections with people. That's why family is so hard. Family can hurt you more than anyone, but nobody loves you like family. Nobody knows you like family. And our square footage is going up because we need more stuff to bond with. It's interesting. Now, I don't know if this service or this generation of people has that problem as much as my generation does, but my generation has that problem. We don't connect very well with each other. And if we're going to take Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17 to heart, we need to be connected intentionally with each other. But there's another problem, a bigger problem. And the bigger problem is that corrosion. If I were to liken you to a razor blade, and I'm going to, your problem is corrosion. And corrosion is caused when you're asking the wrong question. I'm going to give you an example. A story I'm making up. This is not true. This did not happen here, although I'm sure some of you are going to think I'm talking about you. I'm not. If you're thinking I'm talking about this person sitting next to you, I'm not. I'm making this up. So the made-up story is you walk into a church for the very first time and there's someone serving coffee and you say to the person, hey, why are you serving the coffee? And the person says, well, maybe a little too honestly, they respond because they say, one time I walked up here and asked why we only serve decaf coffee. The next week I got a phone call saying I'd been nominated to make the coffee from now on and serve it. Quit looking at each other, it gives it away. Doesn't that happen? See, the question is that we focus on is the what. What are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about that? How are we going to fix this problem? Who's going to be the one to do it? How much is it going to cost? Where are we going to have it? Instead of the question that we must always, always start with, which is, why are we doing it? Now, I would never suggest that there's a single ministry in this church that you're doing that doesn't have a very good why. Like, we've always done it. Or Pastor Craig will get mad if we don't do it. That has whys like that. I'm sure nothing like that exists. But if something were to, the first question we should ask is, why are we doing this? And it better be a really good, real reason. Because you can say, I could ask that guy on a different day when he's maybe not in such a bad mood, and he might say, hospitality, we want to be hospitable. But his real answer was what he first said. Now let's rewind to where that started. Let's say that in the history of the church in the United States of America, there was no coffee ever until one lady stood up at one point during a worship service or after a worship service and said, I have a question. Is it okay if I bring coffee for everyone next week? To which they would say, why do you want to do that? It costs you money, it takes your time. Why? And she says, because when I invite someone into my house, I want them to feel like they will love me. I want them to know I care that they're there. And when we share a cup of coffee, it just feels better. Okay, yes, you can make coffee for everyone next week. That's fantastic. But then what happens after time is that she eventually steps down after 20 years of doing it, and somebody new is elected. Now, why do we elect you to do it? Because I'm the best coffee maker this church has ever seen. The why has just shifted. And then after 10 years of that person doing it, we elect another person. Why are you the person doing it? Because I'm the one who knows how it works. And then that person is done after maybe 6 months, because that's a horrible lie. There's a new person, and they say, why are you doing it? Well, I don't know, my wife suggested I do it one time. And so now I've been doing it. And then somebody walks up to them and says, why are you giving us caffeine? That's a drug. You should be giving us decaf only. He says, okay, I don't, yeah, sure. And then the next guy comes up and says, why are you only serving decaf? I'm just curious. And he goes, you do it. See how quickly it can change? No, I'm sure nothing like that has ever happened here again. But if it had, the easy way to short circuit that process is to stop and say, why are we doing this? I was one time asked to be a part, to lead a small group of, and this is how I was asked to lead the group of 7th grade boys. They asked, the guy said, Doug, if you want to be a leader in this youth ministry, you need to lead a small group. I have a group of 7th grade boys. It's going to be an hour and a half every week. You get 2 weeks off during the school year and all summer off. Are you going to do it? Yeah, I'm going to do it. I have an attitude about it because I don't want to do it, but I want to be a leader. And so, okay, fine, I'll do it. And it was horrible. These kids, all they wanted to do, they didn't want to talk about God or anything like that. And I didn't know what to do with them, and so they just wanted to watch videos and talk about silly things. And it was horrible. Every week I thought, when are we done? When are we done? This is the worst thing. I was a college student. So then you go into how I've learned to ask people, which is by starting with the why. Let me tell you about some of these kids. And I share their story. And I tell the person I'm meeting with one-on-one who they are, and what they're struggling with, and what they need. So what they need is just a caring adult to be there, consistently, and say,